I'd like to thank everyone for coming out again tonight. This is a really good event. It's been a blast, some great presentations, so thanks again for coming. I'd also like to thank the Canada BIM Council and Building Smart Canada and some of our event sponsors, the Algonquin College Construction Research Centre, NORR Architects and Engineers, Ellis Don, Public Service and Procurement Canada, and the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. I'd also like to start by introducing Digital Built National Capital Region. So you've heard it a couple times tonight, but we're a new group forming in the NCR. We're from a government town, so we go by the acronym of DBNCR. It's a little bit easier to say than that mouthful that everyone seemed to stumble on tonight. But our overall goal for this group is to kind of start looking beyond BIM in the region, looking at how technology is being used in different industries and how we can apply that to the built environment. So that's kind of been a theme of what has been going on tonight. Usually these events that we've been hosting are very focused on BIM and the AEC industry, but we wanted to expand beyond that tonight. So that being said, we've had a very diverse group of speakers. So that's kind of the lens that we're going to be doing this panel on. How are we bringing different industries together, different groups of people who have wholly different lives and careers going, and how do we bring everyone together and improve the built environment and improve the world we live in? So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Up first, we have Cameron Wilson. He holds a master's in Geographic Information Systems at Carleton University and is employed with the Federal Department of Natural Resources since 1997. And he has been a large promoter of open data. He created Canada's open data website, GeoGratis, in 1999, and which is an early catalyst of today's open environment. Since then, he works on international systems integration enabled by open standards, an example of which are the 8-nation Arctic and marine spatial data infrastructure integrating data from around our circumpolar Arctic. So Cameron, would you like to come up? Oh, there you are. Yeah, grab a seat, please. Thanks. Up next, we have Lara Chow. So we've heard from her already this evening. She is the Associate Director at the Carleton Immersive Media Studio, a research center associated with the Israeli School of Architecture and Urbanism at Carleton University, where her research agenda is concerned with the study and development of hybrid forms of representation and fabrication for architectural rehabilitation and heritage conservation. She has led several research teams for projects at SIMS, including the Center Block BIM, Library of Parliament BIM, and development of an urban model of the National Capital Region of Ottawa. Lara holds a Bachelor of Architectural Studies and Masters of Architecture from Carleton University. And finally, we have another person we've heard from tonight, Janice Sharp. She began her career in one of Canada's pioneering mapping and surveying companies, which was acquired by McDonald Detweiler. There she held a position as Ottawa manager of the mapping and orthophoto divisions. With public service as a key ambition, Ms. Sharp moved on to Public Works and Government Services Canada as a geomatics project manager and the head of the development of geomatics service delivery program for the department. She continued to take on leadership positions in agriculture and agri-food Canada, where she spent 12 years working in environment, science and technology policy, and program delivery. During this time, she also led a number of strategic planning initiatives at senior levels in the department. She joined Natural Resources Canada 3 years ago, returning to her roots in geomatics and now leading the federal geospatial program. In this role, she leads a multidisciplinary team in the delivery of an online geospatial data sharing organization, which brings together the government's valuable geospatial data assets through partnership policies and standards. Ms. Sharp has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Guelph with specialization in geographic information and resource management. Janice. Oh. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. So I'd like to start off with a question about innovation. So Lara, I'm going to direct this one at you to start off. So innovation is used in so many contexts and for so many minor improvements, it has nearly lost all of its meaning. As someone who works at the forefront of research, how do you define true innovation?
So I might be walking around the question a little bit. I think it's on. So at SIMS, typically what we find innovation is when you take an existing workflow and kind of apply the emerging digital technologies and augment it. So it's really about trial and error, and you tend to fail a lot. So it's not necessarily creating something new that we find innovation in, but augmenting something so that you improve the quality of it or you improve the efficiency of something. And at times when you look at the digital fabrication workflows, sometimes when you augment the traditional workflow, you do actually produce something new and novel. But a lot of the times we just find tweaking kind of the traditional workflows is actually what is innovative. And coming from kind of a research lab, we look at industry workflows and say, okay, how can we improve this? And we're really lucky to work with some really great partners in the industry that can help us and say, okay, yes, this works, this doesn't. So I don't know if that completely answers, these small little steps that everyone, says is innovation. I do truly think you need all those small little innovative steps to get somewhere much larger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of an unfair question to start with, but
it's hard to define.
Yeah, exactly. Would anyone else like to add any comment to that?
Sure. For me, innovation isn't necessarily about, the science and the research and that sort of side of things. For me, innovation can be a lot smaller than that. So it's not necessarily doing something brand new that's never been done in the world before. For me, it's about giving your employees or your team or your organization the space to try something new and to break through the norms that they're used to and try something different. And often in government, we struggle with that on a micro level. It's difficult for us to kind of break through what's been done because it works and because people are familiar with it. Well, I'll use an example of the Federal Geospatial Platform. We had, because it was a partnership of multiple departments, we had to pick technology. I don't know how many of you have technology-driven teams, but sometimes there's camps. One camp believes in one technology and one camp believes in the other. And building consensus around the choice of a technology can be really difficult. But if you give them a little bit of space to say, convince me of which should be better and allow them to innovate, then it breaks through their preconceived notions of what's the best choice, and it allows them a bit more liberty. So from my perspective, it's about enabling your organization to have some time and space in their day-to-day world and carve out that space to be innovative.
And I'd just like to add a couple other points, if I may. So over the years, where I've probably been most innovative and seen other people be most innovative is when I worked completely outside of my comfort zone. So when I'm inside my comfort zone in geomatics, I'm innovative. But when I was listening to you talk about the digital innovation and stuff you're doing with point clouds and the parliamentary precinct and stuff, the words you used were the same words we would use in geomatics. You use things like photogrammetry and point clouds. We use those in geomatics. Other aspects of working outside your comfort space, I remember when I was in graduate school, I thought I would take a bird course. It was a 5th year physics of remote sensing. Easy peasy, until I walked into the class and I realized they were talking about physics of remote sensing of the inside of your body. So medical imaging, completely different than satellites. But interesting enough, the physics were very, very similar. And so what we see is you go to school, you learn all this good stuff, and then you get a job and you get sort of pigeonholed in that thing over years. And you forget that your terms are used by you and you and you and you. Even though we were in different domains, we have the same methodologies. The second point I'd like to make, and if I can leave one message that sticks tonight, because I was looking at all the BIM tables over there with the vendors and whatnot, is I'm not sure if BIM's there yet through the ISO processes, but it's really important to separate data from the application of the data. That decoupling is what has created innovation for us. So for example, we do a lot of mapping for the military and whatnot, but yet some of that mapping is being used by the New Brunswick Lung Association to track lung health for people with chronic pulmonary issues. We would never have predicted that in a million years, but it's because we separated the data from the application, and I hope that can happen in a BIM environment as well.
Great. That's actually a pretty good lead into the next question. And it kind of touches on what you were talking about too, Janice, where there's different technologies and tools that are being used and they're kind of competing against each other. So clearly open data is a requirement for innovation and moving forward. And in the AEC industry, we have a concept called Open BIM, which is kind of playing with those ISO standards, and we're trying to build that up. So there's clearly a lot still that we have to learn. So what are there similar initiatives in your respective industries that have addressed this problem already of open data and interoperability and not being locked into a specific vendor? Would you like to start?
Sure. Yes, the answer is yes. So we're involved in a lot of standards organizations. We're involved with ISO, which you're also involved with, but we're also involved with some very old standards organizations, including the International Hydrographic Organization, which probably came out of colonialism in the 1700s or something to map the seas. We're also involved with the World Wide Web Consortium to embed geomatics in browsers, Chrome, Mozilla, whatnot. So that's a way to do innovation. But probably the most interesting one, I think, for this group is the Open Geospatial Consortium. The Open Geospatial Consortium is a consortium of over 520 companies and agencies and large government departments, NASA, NOAA, NRCan, Ordnance Survey, very big agencies. And because there's industry involvement, then the standards are applied through industry space and in industry products. So we've worked a lot with ISO in the past, and the risk that we had with ISO is that the process was long and it seemed a little bit academic at the end. Whereas through the Open Geospatial Consortium, because we have 500 companies at the table, then that standard conversations actually manifest into product through product development cycles.
Great.
I'll say yes to the question. For us, the open government piece is a really important one from the geospatial perspective. I'm not sure how long ago it was, about a decade, maybe a little more, that geospatial data was charged for. There was a whole cost recovery model around it. So it wasn't actually that long ago that Natural Resources Canada opened up its data and made it available free. So an initiative like the Federal Geospatial Platform, which brought together all these federal organizations and helped steward them into sharing their data in an interoperable way and to a certain set of standards, had a couple of spin-off effects that we didn't really expect. First of all, it helped drive the idea of data stewardship. Departments, organizations create massive amounts of data, but managing the data effectively so that its value is maximized and it's reusable by others for, as Cameron alluded to, things you would never have thought of, is kind of a key responsibility as a data owner. So we found that in the short time that the platform has existed, and probably before that through some of the work NRCan has done on standards, that we've really started shifting the mindset of federal departments and their organizations within to steward data in a much different way, knowing that it's now a requirement where possible to make your books open to the public. And so a whole culture shift around managing information for the greater good rather than just for our own projects is something that we've really seen accelerate over the past couple of years. And I think there are a couple of examples of really innovative work that have happened. We had one where a gentleman wanted to do an adventure race in a certain area of Ontario and used some data that we make available to develop and print a 3D model of a particular area to understand how long it would take him to navigate this particular ridgeline. And he shared that information with us, which we thought was fabulous. We never would have thought that, but it was just a little micro scale 3D printout for adventure racing. I mean, this is just one that we know of, but I'm sure there are millions of others. So those are just some of the sort of spin-offs that we didn't really expect from opening our data up.
So I guess from SIMS on the kind of other side of receiving data, we often kind of have to act as a mediator between multiple stakeholders for a project when they feed us data and then try to almost synthesize all the different data sets into one shared data set. And sometimes that can be very challenging. So I definitely think that, you know, having open data is very important, but the lack of standards is what we've really noticed, and especially when we're looking at like urban scaled projects, trying to find the standard for what this data should be and kind of the information that should carry and the level of detail has been challenging for us, and sometimes we have to make up our kind of own, I guess, rules or standards within kind of the stakeholders. So I guess that's kind of SIM's approach.
Okay. If I could.
Yeah,
so just to comment on that. So one of the most interesting projects I've seen that I never thought would happen, and the power of standards, is we're building a digital Arctic, a circumpolar Arctic over land and the oceans and in the oceans in conjunction with the United States, Russia, and all the Nordic countries. So think about that for a second. Imagine sitting down at that table thinking, I would never thought I'd be sitting down with a guy from Moscow and being allowed to do that and to create a digital Arctic. So we've got numerous people coming from all the mapping agencies, from all the hydrographic organizations, but not from the BIM community. And why is that important? Because as climate change takes hold more and more, you look at roads that go up to northern Canada and they're all topsy-turvy. And the whole infrastructure mess will be a big mess in northern Canada and all the northern parts of the world. How does BIM play into that sort of construct where things change rapidly due to climate and the ground giving out underneath you? What was yesterday's permafrost is tomorrow's swamp or wetland. How do we reconcile that in terms of our building infrastructure and highway infrastructure? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a real role there for standards in the BIM community.
Great. I'm glad you asked that, because that kind of leads into our next question.
You're welcome.
So with the rise of stronger and faster networks, inexpensive sensors, big data, and machine learning, digitalization has been making its way into nearly every industry. This has caused a sudden and steep learning curve for AEC stakeholders with concepts such as BIM. While BIM and generative design borrow and learn from other industries, they're trying to solve an industry-specific problem. It's becoming ever clearer that we must begin working more closely with those outside of our industry in order to continue innovating and creating the built environment. So playing off what you are kind of alluding to, has collaboration between industries been explored in your work? And what have you learned from these experiences? Larry, would you like to start?
So I think SIMS is really lucky that we are an academic research lab. And so we get to draw on this network of academics from Carleton. So one of the challenges is that as we're, having industry approach us, they're asking us really tough questions that as architects and engineers, we can't always answer. So we've had to draw on some other disciplines. So right now, we've been asked to look at point cloud segmentation and classification in machine learning. And that requires a little bit of, someone from computer science. That's not something that, an architect is able to actually look at. So we've been really lucky to actually draw on some expertise from some professors that do object recognition and machine learning, and bringing them into the lab has been really great because they have such a different perspective of how to tackle a problem. So I think, as architects and engineers, we have a very specific way of thinking. And so when you bring into these other disciplines into your kind of project, it really changes the way you think as well. So it's been really positive because now the lab's grown to have, people from computer science all the way to public history. And so when we get together, we kind of have these like brainstorming sessions where everyone participates. And it's really fruitful because these ideas that we typically wouldn't come out with, they're able to, provide insight on that. So it's been really great, looking to other disciplines. So I think it's imperative to actually, move out of these siloed research silos and also out of our disciplines.
So usually when federal departments have to work together, it's because somebody has told them they have to work together, or they've messed something up and they're in trouble, or Treasury Board or one of the central agencies tells them there's a new policy and you must work together. However, in the geospatial world, most of what we do is voluntary. There aren't a lot of rules and regulations for us at the federal level that force us to do these things. So that voluntary kind of goodwill work has been a tremendous success for us. However, I mean, it did come with some challenges. You know, at the beginning of the project a number of years ago, back in 2014, it really felt to a lot of the people involved that it was a technology-driven project, maybe with a little bit of data. It really wasn't. It was about people. It was really about being able to come to consensus on things like technology and approaches. And it was about building relationships with departments that you never would have worked with before. And we're talking on a fairly large scale. I mean, I don't know how many federal departments, there's hundreds of these organizations, and even working with 10 of them at once can be daunting, but it required employees who weren't really used to working horizontally across different organizations with entirely different mandates to come together for common objectives. It required them to kind of change the way that they thought and the way that they built their relationships. And so that was tough. It wasn't easy for everyone, but in the end, it's a skill set that is going to be required as we move forward and want to expand and continue this relationship of making this information available and making sure that the government is investing wisely in things like geospatial data by working horizontally.
So we've done a lot of collaboration over the years, and what I've learned is it's not about the technology. Technology, you throw 500 programmers in a room for a week or a day and give them good bandwidth, they will come up with a solution every time. That's not a problem. It's the problem is the solution may not be adopted due to cultural or business reasons. So what we find is actually harnessing the power and leveraging all this big data from multiple organizations is really a question of, do people want to do it? Or do they want to do what they're already doing? And it's often they want to do what they're already doing. So culture shift, and I've continuously underestimated this in my career, culture shift takes a long time. Business processes and how people make money, which is very dear to their heart, takes time. So like in an open BIM community, is that a threat to businesses or is it an opportunity? Is it a culture shift for some? Probably. And how is that done? So in my experience, that's the stuff that's taken time. The technology tends to march ahead actually faster than culture.
I think everyone in this room who's tried to implement BIM at their company understands your pain.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad I said the right thing then.
Yeah. So what can we learn from you? Like, what are some of the biggest barriers that you had overcoming these cultural shifts in how people do work and moving forward into the new and brighter ways?
Basically by demonstrating the potential and being very, very persistent.
Okay.
And show me the money. There's a bit of that too.
Yeah, okay. There's always that.
I would add that in my experience, it's always easy to convince very senior levels of a good idea. They think it's fabulous. Oh, that should be done in a week. I can't wait to see it. Getting people to collaborate at the working level and drive towards what senior management thinks is a great idea often takes a lot of effort. So that's a continued challenge to bridge the distance between what the executives think is fabulous and what the people on the ground actually think is probably a terrible idea, and building sort of consensus around that and mobilizing people to a common purpose is a continued challenge in this area, I think.
Okay, so my last question, seeing as we're in the National Capital Region and the whole theme is innovation and digital, what advantages does the NCR have which allows this region to innovate at such a high level? Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
I guess I'll start. So I guess, like I said in my last research project that we're looking at, we're really lucky to be located in this corridor that contains nearly 50% of Canada's population. So we have a lot of expertise to draw on, not from just within the region, but from outside the region. And then, looking at all of the big tech players that are kind of in this area, it's kind of incredible. So I think that there's a lot of expertise that we can draw on and a lot of people that we can draw on. So I think that's really one of the benefits in the national capital.
Thank you.
And to build on the earlier presentation by Invest Ottawa, there were some really good points around, highly qualified personnel, the academic support in Ottawa. It's a seat of government, which not only brings policy, but also brings money, like all that House of Commons renovations, which were noted in 2 or 3 presentations tonight. And also just the standard stuff, like all the standards, international standards engagements, actually that's done through Ottawa. So there's a plethora of expertise, and I think it's a very rich environment for Ottawa as a city, not as a capital, but as a city, to really pursue some of these smart technologies and through BIM and other mechanisms.
Thank you.
I agree with that, and it's true. We do have an incredibly talented workforce to work with, and for me as a federal organization, it's having access to all the head offices of all the other organizations that are mostly here in Ottawa. But that's true for industry as well. I mean, it's an opportunity to work with federal agencies that are all kind of centrally located in one city. It's a kind of a wealth of information. From my experience, every department I've worked for, we are so welcoming of partnering and working with industry and industry associations. So it's really an opportunity on both sides to develop partnerships and networks.
Great. Thank you very much. Do we have time for a couple audience questions, if there are any? No, I guess there's none anyway. So, all right. Thank you to our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.